So today we are going to go over some soldering. I'm working on an RC car and I just realized all the wires are too short, so I'm going to resolder fresh wires on the entire ESC, and I want to show you guys how I do it because it's a little bit hard if you've never done it before. Okay, so here's the ESC I will be soldering. I am moving my setup around a little bit on my car, which means none of my wires are going to reach, so I got to go into here and go directly onto the board and solder fresh wires onto all of these for batteries and motor terminals, which means I got to put these bullets back on and do a bunch of other little stuff. So we're going to get into that. I'm going to show you how to do it. All right, let's talk about what I'm going to use to make this soldering all happen. The first item I'm going to talk about is the soldering iron itself. This one's made by Haku. It's an FX888D, and it comes as a whole kit with the actual iron itself, the power supply, and this base and stand with a little, it also has a little cleaner in here for you to wash off your stuff. This has been a really great soldering iron, and I've had it for about 6 years. It's the type of thing that if you buy it once, you really don't have to worry about it again, and that's why I chose this one. I also think it looks pretty cool. Next thing you're going to need with your soldering iron, and if you have a base and stand with it like this one does, this one's got a sponge built in, which is nice, so I can clean it off, and also the actual little copper bristles in there. You're going to want some solder. You're going to want the actual wire to solder. So that's what this is. This is just some, I don't think it was crazy expensive. Wizzo Tech, I'm not expecting much from it, but it's been working for me for years, and it's a massive roll. I believe it comes with flux already in it, which is very nice because you have to do less of that, and because that's a lot of messy stuff if you're spreading flux around. So I try to get stuff that actually has flux built into it. It just seems to work better. Next thing is this little mini vise, like a little, you know, just a twist vise for setting stuff in. I'll be using this to set this ESC in, like so. We'll get this all locked in here when I'm ready to actually solder. Get it tightened up, and then you got a little bit more stability to work with. That leads into the next little jig that we have. It's actually called a Mr. Jig. I've also owned this thing since I've had this soldering iron, and this thing's super nice because it is made for bullets. So if I pull this out of here real quick, and I'll show you why this thing is so cool. If you look in the top, you can see all these holes that are milled out. Well, what you can do is when you go to solder your bullets, you can just set those in the hole, hit it with your soldering iron, pull your wire off, and your actual bullet will just stay here. You don't have to go chasing it around or grabbing it with pliers. Got sizes for all the different ones, so if we're going to do one of our bigger 4mm ones, you know, they fit up to 5, even big helicopter, massive joints. If you're doing drag racing, helicopter stuff, anything like that will fit. So this thing is super nice. This little side is also made for connectors, like your Dean's connectors and stuff like that. It'll just kind of, it's its own little built-in vise, so you can kind of clamp down on those. Different directions, all that type of stuff. This is a fun little tool. I'll make sure I link all of these parts and all these tools that I use because I really do think that they work well, and they've honestly lasted me for years and years now, and I don't expect having to replace them soon. So now let's hop into getting this thing all fixed up and ready to go. I do need to go grab some wire. That's the one thing I forgot to grab. So I'm going to go grab the wire, and I'll talk about that a little bit here in a second. So next you get to choose which wire you want to use. This is a roll that I think I bought in 2015 from Dean's Wire. It's Dean's Ultra. I think it's one of my favorite wires. It's just got the best kind of twist to it, and it doesn't fray too bad over time. It's been really good stuff. So same company that makes Dean's plugs, they have a, this isn't the wet noodle, but they have another type of wire that's a little bit hard to find called wet noodle, and that stuff looks really nice. It just kind of rolls, and you can flow it and bend around anything. So if you need wire, I like buying in bulk because, like I said, I bought it in 2015 and I haven't had to think about it since. This is what I'm going to use to make this all happen. Let's get right into the kind of step-by-step what I would do in my process and what I'm going to do in my process to make this ESC work for us. All right, so let's get this iron on going for us. See what the temp's at, 750. That's about where I start normally. Now this is going to take a second to heat up. You can see on this actual tip, I have some solder already on it. You always want to cover your tips with solder when they're cooling once you're done using them, because that will keep them safe and protected over time. So on this ESC, we are going to just start taking these off one at a time. I'm going to take some little cutters and get these yellow, blue, and orange heat shrinks off real quick. That way I have access to the actual solder joint. Alright, so as you can see, we have our little solder joints. I've got my iron here. Now with this iron, before I go to take any of the solder joints off, what I want to do is actually get some fresh solder on it. And you're probably not going to be able to see this perfectly, but I'm going to kind of pre-tin the actual soldering iron itself. Then we'll go on and use that tin and that solder to start loosening up the ones that are already on there. There we go, got the capacitor off. Okay, now that we got the first one off, we'll get some more, we'll clean this up a little bit. Just getting my touch back for soldering. So yeah, so this one, that first one came off, no problem. This is just gonna get stuff out of the way. Again, I'm gonna pre-tin this actual soldering iron. Then I'll come in and touch and get this, the old solder to start heating up. And then I can just use a little force and peel that right off, just like so. So that's kind of the trick. We are going to do that for the rest of this. I'm going to get these power ones off. Now the power ones are a little bit harder because a lot of times you got to use a little bit more heat and soak it in a little bit more. I'm hoping though that we don't have too many issues getting these old wires out. So we're going to just start pulling those old wires out. Okay, there we go, there's the first one. Now that we got that out, I didn't really even know what these cups in here look like, so now I can actually get a little bit of an eye on them. As you can see, they're like little metal half cups. So when I pulled the wire from it and heated it up, I actually kind of heated it and then I peeled it out and away. So now when we go to resolder fresh wire in here, I'll probably get some fresh solder, fill that up. Might even pull some of that old solder out by just sticking my iron in it, letting it heat up. It'll soak onto the iron a little bit, and then I will get some fresh clean stuff in when I go to put the new motor wires on. All right, let's knock out the rest of these and then we'll catch up when we start cleaning the board up a little bit. So one thing I do want to mention is that a lot of times the factory soldering points, when they come from factory, these are all still stock cables from factory, they come very, very well soldered and are often really hard to get off. So if you struggle to get them off, it's probably because your iron's not hot enough or you're not using enough flux or getting enough fresh solder into it. I noticed that these wanted to dry up a little bit when I didn't get enough extra of my own solder into it. So we're working through these, they're coming off real nice. I'll clean this up. You'll see some yellowing on the board a little bit. That's not so much from burning anything. That is really just the flux that is in the solder. I think that's from whoever put this capacitor on. I think there was a lot of flux they used to do that. And those were kind of from the outside solders that were just tagged onto there. So we are going to keep moving along. Got two more left to do. Finally got this yellow one in the center off, the little heat shrink cover on there. So we're going to pull that off. And then after that, we can start working on these bullets, getting them all cleaned off, and then getting our new wires thrown on. Go in and scratch some of this little flux off. It just pops right off. Just be careful. You won't hurt anything if you're careful with this. Once you do that, you can take like a little toothbrush. Or I got this little brush here. We'll just hit it with this. Now we should be just about ready to go to add some new wires. The biggest thing is getting the lengths all correct, and we'll start working on that now. I just turned my iron off for a few minutes. We are going to get into actually figuring out the right length of wire for these. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to organize these and figure out which ones I need to make longer. Well, obviously all of them, but also how much longer. Usually for the battery leads, when I go to do those, I'll make those a decent bit extra longer. That way I have some room to move around setups and play with just positioning of stuff. So we'll go a little bit extra long on those, and then these are the motor wires. I'll probably add about 2 inches to each one and then extend it out. So if I'm gonna use it like this, I'll just line it up with my old wire, take the old one and the new one, line them up like so, go out a little bit extra, and then probably cut around there. And that should give me plenty of room to reach from back here in the ESC up and around to the actual motor plugs. So I always like to do a little bit extra measuring, so make sure you guys really go through and think about it, plan it out in your head, take some wire, run it together, kind of like so, and then just weave it around where you might be weaving it around your car and your setup, so you can kind of get an idea how it's going to flow. That way you can make everything look pretty, because honestly, if it doesn't look pretty, what's the point? Alright, so we got this one. Take it like so. Measure it out to about there. Give it a nice little snip. And then we're going to take that one that we just cut right here. That's for our motor wire. That we know is going to have plenty of room to reach around and fit pretty much anywhere we put the ESC. We're going to just make 3 of those the same. Since that first one is the longest one, should work. Anything we cut after that will probably end up shortening in the end, but for now we're going to just make them the same so they're all uniform. To our battery connectors now, our battery wires. It's kind of nice going to new cable too. It all just feels so much nicer than the stock cable. Not that there's anything wrong with, you know, any of the HobbyWing stuff. This stuff that I'm putting on is just a little thicker, a little bit more matte. It's not as shiny, so it's a little bit more of a subdued low-key look, which is cool. Like I said, with batteries, I want to go a lot extra long because I don't know how I'm going to set this car up yet. So we're going to do some nice long boys right there. There's a motor lead. There's a difference with the battery one I'm going to do. Actually, I'll go a little extra just to be safe. Like I said, I got tons of wire here that I've had for years. And I'm not too worried about running through because I got a couple more cars out of it for sure. Now, let me get the second one cut. And then we will work on getting these installed onto the ESC side of things. It's 5 new wires cut for 5 replacement wires. Our 2 batteries right here are going to be these long ones. These motor ones right here will be replaced by these guys. Once I get these put on the ESC, then I can go through and start putting all the bullets on. Once I get the ESC set on the car, that way I can make sure the bullets all kind of twist in the right direction. Like they'll aim towards the actual can. They're not pointing off this way, and then I got to put a twist in the wire, because it doesn't look as good. So we're going to make sure it looks good and flows right and solder once we get to there. But the first step now to get this all into the ESC is we're going to need to take our wire strippers and strip one side down and pre-tin one entire side. You can do the other one now too, but I'm going to wait a little bit just until, because it might be a little bit of a different cut depending on the type of bullets and how far in the wire will sit to the bullets. So I'm going to wait on those, but for now we're going to do at least a very similar cut across all these with our strippers to get that to go back into these little cups. Okay, so now you can see those little soldering cups for these wires. You can see kind of what I have to think about doing. I need to cut just enough off the end of this with the wire strippers, just right here, just enough to get it to sit in that cup. I'm going to do something that, I don't know, if you're not comfortable with, you don't have to, but I don't think it's too hard. So if you want to try, you definitely could. We're going to take an X-Acto blade. And what you do is you just find your spot, and then you just roll it really gently across it, like so. And then if we're lucky, that cut right through. Nice and clean. And you have a wire that's just about the right length to sit right in that cup right there. You can see any of those I put it in, it's going to be just about long enough. Now what you're going to do with this, before you go to solder it in, is I always take it, make sure it's straight and flattened out like that. I put a little twist in the end just to kind of put all these together. If you can see, you'll kind of, these guys will all kind of get rolled together, which helps them from fraying, because what happens when you go to solder and fill this with solder is a lot of times if you hit it or if you poke it and touch one of these actual things while you're going to put it in, it'll bust it up and it'll fray it all out, and then it doesn't fit in that hole as well. So I do that Now I'm going to do this on every single one. So I'm going to repeat this 5 times. That way we can have 5 wires all looking the same, matching. That way it looks nice and dialed in. Another thing, if you want to get fancy while you're here at this point, you can start making sure that you're cutting all the wires so that the words and the letters are all the same way. That way when they are on the ESC, everything's coming out, it looks kind of cool. Just a personal preference. Most of us, like, I know with the drifting stuff and the RC cars, a lot of it is like so scale and so like personal that you want it to actually, you know, you put a lot of time and effort into it, so you don't ever want to make anything look too bad. Alright, I think that's the easiest way, is using a little X-Acto blade, taking it, just rolling along on the table, real gentle. Just like so. Pops right off. Nice clean cut. This is a fresh blade too on my X-Acto, so that's why it's cutting so well too. Don't do that with a dull blade and expect great things to happen. Guys, if this is helping you at all, if you're enjoying this video and you're learning something, make sure you subscribe and like the video. Go check out my Instagram. Go check out my Patreon. I just started a Patreon, and I'm going to be posting some behind the scenes stuff there. You don't have to pay, but if you want to support the channel, it's an awesome way to do it, and it would help me be able to keep doing all this stuff. But yeah, I'm going to use that as almost like a little Facebook place. There's a free membership. You can just join just so you're part of the crew. You can kind of see what's going on. I'll post updates. I'll do some behind the scenes stuff. To start, there's just going to be for fun, just trying to get some more community building going so I can meet some more people and put some more faces to names. So if you guys are interested in that at all, go hit that up. Go check it out below. But for now, I got these all cut. There they are, all pre-cut. So now I got to go through and pre-tin every one of them. So let's check out that process. All right, so I'm going to click my iron back on because we are going to pre-tin these. What pre-tinning is, it's where you take your raw wire that you just cut and stripped, and you take solder, your soldering iron, and you fill all these little ends with fresh solder before you go to put it onto your actual item. Just about there. Now I bumped the temperature up to 790 on my iron just to help break off that stock solder from the factory. I'm going to bump it back down to 750 though, because now that I'm using my solder, I know that I don't need that much heat, and that much heat will just cause damage if I let it sit too long. So I don't want to risk it. Now to pre-solder these, I hope you can see that. Yeah, you can. I'm just going to heat the wire. Put this, I usually just set this on the bottom side of the wire. I take the front of the solder that I'm pulling in fresh, and I just tap it right onto the blade right above that wire. And then it kind of flows down and into the wire, and you just kind of keep doing that until it starts to flow. And it take a little bit of time, and a lot of times you want to pump a good amount of solder in there. Sometimes you want to move it around, move that little solder bubble around, and just work it around a little bit. Hit over here, and just start letting it flow into this wire. This wire will get hot, so be careful if you're touching it. I can already feel it's getting a little warm down by my finger. But that's just pretty much the process of pre-tinning and getting your stuff ready to go. Now, if you do this and you take your time doing this, the whole process of actually getting it into the ESC or onto your motor, whatever you're soldering onto, is going to be a much easier process. So that's basic. I'm going to go in, I'm going to hit some of these sides, but I got to roll it around and you're not going to be able to see it. So I'm going to hit all these and I'll show you the finished product. Okay, here they are all pre-tinned, and we're about to install them onto the ESC, so let me show you how I do that. So what I most likely will do is I'll probably start with this middle one and work my way out. That way I can kind of just work out and make sure everything stays clean on both sides and doesn't get any solder going from one contact to the next. You want to make sure you avoid getting solder in between these two and touching those together. You create a short, you create a lot of issues with that, so you don't want to do that. Also too, I need to think about putting that power, this little, what do they call this, little capacitor back onto the negative and the positive. So I gotta factor that into my decision. I'll probably do that at the end and just do a little bead of solder on top. Once those are done and everything's on, I'll just tack those right on like a little tack weld onto this thing. That is my plan. So let's get started on that. So make sure your wires are separated. I got my battery ones here. I'll leave those to the side. And I will start with my motor wires that I have. So as you can see, this is going to go right there like so. Now the easiest way to do this is kind of like a little two-step method, or it's like a little dual method. You're gonna wanna, what I usually do is I'll take the soldering iron, I'll touch onto the pad, and then I'll set this on top of the soldering iron while it's touching the pad so that both sides start heating. Once they start melting and they're starting to flow, I'll peel this out, get the wire kind of fall in there, start touching right on top of the wire, and that will kind of heat the whole pocket up again, making it all, you know, fully liquid, and it usually will set right down in where I want it. So I'm gonna try that. Hopefully you guys can see me doing that, and hopefully it looks pretty good. And we will get it all in there, set up. So this is a motor one, so we're gonna be putting it on the B right here in the center. And let's give this a shot. Make sure your tip's all cleaned up. Again, you can put some fresh solder on from your roller solder. That usually helps, gives you a little bit extra starting. Do a little bit on each side. And then I'm gonna touch the pocket, touch this. Starting to heat and flow, like so. Now that they're together, I can heat this up on the outside, and it will start falling into place. Give it a little pressure, you give it a little twist even. If you see that, just like so, heated right up and fell right into place. Now this is where you can come in and do a little bit of adjusting if you want. Say it's touching a little bit, or you want to push it down into the pocket a little bit more. Get the angle a little bit straighter, like I just corrected right there. And there you are. That's one motor wire soldered on. I know this looks a little crusty. That just happens with metal and stuff like that. If you took a little wire brush, once you're finished with all this, you could do like a little light wire brushing on this and it would clean that all up. It's just a little bit of surface stuff. It's not even corrosion or anything like that. It's really just from that liquid flux that's in the solder. It's just the color that it turns, and when it hardens and burns out, that's what it looks like. So you really don't have to worry about it. You can even take some rubbing alcohol when there's no power to anything on a little Q-tip and go in and clean it up a lot better. So far this is looking good. That's nice and straight coming off the actual post, which means when I go to run it into the car, it's gonna look perfect. So let's start with those battery terminals now that we can see them. Let's get this next one on. I'm gonna get some solder on my tip again. I know I keep repeating that, but honestly it's pretty important. Like I said earlier, this is a battery terminal, so we are going to use one of our longer wires that we set up. Get this all in here. That's going to drop that solder. And right now, like as you can see, that's dropped in. It's just barely tacked in, but now I can just let it sit too and then come back in and correct it from there. So stuff happens quickly, but you also have time to correct it and fix it. Like if you were getting to the point where you're just cooking this wire in here and you're like, I can't get it to set, and you're having an issue with it, just take a break. Stop, take a break, come back to it, clean up, and you'll have a better shot going into it again the second time. Like now, since I've taken a little break, my solder was sitting on the tip for a little bit long. It was starting to dry out. So I'm going to throw a little bit of fresh stuff on, and then I'm going to work this one right back into the pocket and get this wire all set. Okay, I'll get the second battery wire installed. Between soldering, you also want to give this thing a minute to cool down. It's starting a little warm on me, so I'm going to let it cool down for a bit. While I'm letting that cool down, I'm going to throw these bullet plugs from these old wires into this little stand, and I am going to remove them while we wait for that ESC to cool down. Super simple process. This is why the stand is so cool and why I enjoy it so much. Bullets are right there inside of them. Give it a little solder on top. Nice and hot, comes right out, and you're good to go. So taking them off, putting them on, this thing is super, super useful. These are really small. I think these are 3mm bullets for, like I said, these motor wires. I have these larger 4s, but I need to take off these caps real quick. So let me take these caps off. Bullet caps, I have them, I've got them listed down below if you guys need them. You want to get a set for your car. They clean things up. They make them look really, really cool. Take a little 1.5. If you've never seen these before, they're by 1UP Racing. They're just covers for your bullets. They got a little lock screw right here. Pop that off, like so. There's your bullet underneath it. These just attach. They're a really cool little system they got. Dials things in, makes it look real cool. All right, let's get this black one off for my negative. There we go. And same process, just throw these bullets in here, like so. Now these are a little bit longer bullets I have. Play around with whatever style you like. We'll get a little solder on here, clean this up a little, give it a little extra flow. And yeah, you just press until it's hot and slide it out, and you got a nice little clean bullet connector to reuse right there. Just like that. All right, now let's go hop back over to the ESC and get the final wire soldered up onto this ESC. We'll put that little capacitor back on, and we'll be just about ready to groove with this thing and installing it again. So it's not the hardest process. Soldering isn't the hardest. It just takes time. It can be a little bit nerve-wracking because obviously you're working with electrical stuff and you don't want to mess any of that up. Obviously, this stuff gets pricey. So if you know anybody that does solder though and you need help, just ask them. They'll probably help you. It's not the hardest thing. Throw them 20 bucks. You help them, they'll help you out a little. All right, this one's giving me a little problem. Let me get some more solder on here. Load this thing up, get it to flow. It's a trick. There we go, yep. Once you get enough solder there, it will flow and attach. Now that's a big chonky one, but... Now they make a lot of different things. You can get stuff to pull solder off. They make little suction guns. I've got a couple of those. I don't use them that often because I usually don't need to, but if you're ever working on like an actual board, now you can see here right between there, I see some wires sitting in there. I don't want that to touch anything. So I need to fix that and just pull that over, just clean that solder up a little bit. Should be all good. I'll pull some solder out of that joint. If you saw what I did, I just kind of twisted while I was heating it, and it kind of flipped it, caught it on one side, and then I can take a little patch off with it. Clean it up a little bit, make it a little bit nicer. Maybe I'll do the same with this one. This guy's a little bit thick in there. Pull some of that out. Just hitting that top edge. Now, if we look at that, it should all be clean. I want this guy. So they're all pretty straight. This guy's outside a little bit. Bring him back into the pocket a little more. Yeah, like that. This is where you can kind of work on just practicing getting cleaned up on your little actual solder joints. You do this enough time and you won't have any real issues you run into. This one's got a lot on it, so I'm going to try to clean him up a bit and get some off of him. That worked good. Okay, that's all looking good. Now we just got one more left to do. There we go. Just, you can kind of feel the heat and just slide right into place. Oop, I drugged that one. I shouldn't have done that. I'm going to fix this up a little bit in the middle of that. Okay, so unfortunately I made a little mistake and I got a little loose and wild with my solder. As you can see, it's touching over here now. I don't want that. You don't want that at all. So we got a tool out of the garage that will help us hopefully fix that problem. This is a little suction gun for soldering. I think I got this on Amazon. It was super cheap. I will make sure these are linked too in case you need them. But what you do is you just pump that. What you're gonna do is you're gonna heat your solder. You're gonna push this right onto where you're heating it. It's got this little tip on it so this won't melt. Once that solder is hot, you're gonna hit that little button and it's gonna sucks it right up and in. So let's try that real quick. I'll hopefully be able to show you guys that. We'll zoom back in so you can kind of see the process. So I got this thing primed up. I'm going to put it right here on top of this little cup. Take our soldering gun. I'm gonna come in here and heat this stuff up. Now, let me add a little extra solder. So it's kind of counterintuitive, but sometimes you gotta add solder to make the old solder liquid again. Kind of just refills it. There we go. Suck it out like that. I got us a little bit. I got us a good chunk out. There we go. If you look, when I clear this thing too, it actually shoots stuff out of the front. All right, so that's a lot better. I'm gonna get in there and just clean it a little bit more with my face up in there. Sometimes this happens, just where you just gotta take your time, get it nice and cleaned out. Could even do is take a little bit of solder off of this joint next to it. Heat him up. Pull some out there. That is kind of what it's doing. I know it's kind of hard to see, but this is actually what it looks like when it starts falling out after you do suck some up. You get kind of like little veins of solder that fell out of it. So it is working. It doesn't look like much, but we're pulling some off, getting it a little bit closer to cleaned up, which is exactly what we need just to make sure that we are safe in running all this stuff and not having any issues. So I'm gonna get right in there on that little bead. It's giving me some trouble. There we go. I just saw the gap clear right up. I know you probably can't tell. There you go. Now you can see there's an actual, you can see the line from the venting behind it. So we're good to go. That was a little bit of, this is where it gets a little risky, guys, but this is why we practice. This is why we just take our time and go slow. We can come back through and fix almost anything as long as we don't make it worse in the process. So now I'm gonna clean this one back up because obviously it got a little chunky looking with all the solder I sucked out of it. So I'll put a little solder back in. I'll get it reset on its little post where it's nice and cleaned up without, hopefully without sliding over and touching that other one again. There we go. Much better. Nice and clean. All right. I don't have to be stressed about that. Let's get this final wire in. It's time now. The ESC is nice and cool still, not too hot. Not heated up too much. Get some fresh solder. And just mash this little guy right in nice and gently. Just let it start working itself in. There we go. Okay, that should be it. There you go. So now you have 5 fresh wires on your ESC. I know nothing's touching. I can see it clearly on here. They may not be the prettiest, but that's all right because it's going to work perfectly fine. Now I need to get this little capacitor back on here. I'm not excited. I don't like having to put these things on here. I don't even know what they do. But I'm going to clean these little hairs up real quick. And then we'll tack this guy back on. Just clean him up, put some fresh solder on him. Both positive and negative. Okay, now I get to figure out which direction. I could go up like this. Tack them on there. Have that there, or I put them on like this. Have it weave down, and then I think I had it rolled up last time and stapled, but I'm just gonna put them probably sticking straight up. I'm gonna grab some tweezers to do this with because this thing's gonna get really hot and I don't wanna burn myself. So let's grab this like so. We're just gonna get a little ball of solder from, put it on our iron, and then just touch them onto the negative. Get them hooked up on there. Mm-hmm. Okay, there's that one. Now these are always hard to make look nice, but there's only so much you can do with this little bit of wire. I did get this ESC secondhand, so it was already cut before I got it. I'm not sure which capacitor. I'm guessing, I don't know if this even came with a capacitor. If it did, I'm guessing this is the one it came with. You're going to want this to flow into that main joint under it too a little bit, so give it a little bit of time to hook up to it. And then we should be good. I think we're there. As long as this doesn't rip off. Nope, it's on there nice and tight. Pull this ESC out of this little block. And we got new fresh wires. Just like so. Now you can do whatever you want with it. They're nice wires too. As you can see, I got all the kind of the lettering turned outwards. Looks kind of cool. Looks kind of factory and clean. Looks good this way. Now it's just going to be about running these wires to the length we want them for our car and then putting our bullet connectors back on. So let's figure that all out. Okay, I got some tape on the bottom of my ESC so that I can get it stuck to my little positioning on my car, and that way I can start laying out where the wires need to go and doing the final length check. So I'm going to get this stuck and I will show you what I have and what I'm working with. So now that this is stuck, I'm going to start doing these wires individually and measuring out and then stripping and pre-tinning and then soldering them to the bullets that will go on here. But I've got these all laid out where I want them from this car in particular. And I'm just going to start working on these. I'll show you, once I get all the motor wires on, I will show you how it looks. Alright, so what I did was I measured it all out with this one wire, and I made sure this is a C wire down here. I'm going to the C tab that's up here on the motor. And then I use my little jig, I pull it over, and I can just wire and solder right on top of that. Hold the wire in. When it gets too hot, I can let go, and it's all good to go. So super useful to have these little tools with you if you are doing this job. As you can see, I'm doing a rear mounted ESC on this rear wheel drive RC drift car, and we're gonna see how it works for me, but I'm just working on getting this all wired before I can even test it. So this is one of those crucial steps you should know how to do, and if you don't know how, you can definitely learn. Don't be too afraid of it. We'll keep teaching you. Ask questions, I can help you. Okay, just finished this all up. New wires all soldered to the ESC, then to the motor, as well as the battery. I hope this video helped you out in any way that I can. If you have any more questions, please let me know. I love making these videos. I love helping you guys out. If you are stuck with something, if you need questions about products, let me know. I'm going to link all the stuff below too that I use just because I trust it. All right, I hope that helped. Thank you guys for watching. Make sure you subscribe, and we'll see you soon.